Arthur Labinjo-Hughes was starved and beaten by Emma Tustin.
And Arthur, we loved him to bits. And as I say, we never saw him again.
No one's gonna feed me!
The whole nation is distraught at Arthur's tragic and horrific death.
No one loves me. No one is going to feed me. Those are the words that broke the hearts of my town.
In the afternoon of June 16th, 2020, Thomas Hughes received a terrifying text message from his partner. His 6-year-old son, Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, was in bad shape, and Thomas needed to hurry home. A few hours later, Thomas received the most heartbreaking news. Arthur was dead. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning of what would turn out to be a very disturbing case. Doctors had discovered something strange about Arthur's death, and Thomas might have played a huge role in it. What happened to Arthur? What did the doctors find? And why was Thomas in the middle of it all? At approximately 2:30 p.m. on June 16th, 2020, Thomas Hughes returned home after receiving a text from his partner, Emma Tustin, claiming that his son was in critical condition. In her message, Emma alleged that Arthur wouldn't get up and had knocked himself out by hitting his head on the floor. Minutes later, Emma dialed 999 to report the emergency.
He's barely there, he's barely breathing, he's in and out, he's taking hard.
And Thomas arrived home shortly thereafter. When paramedics reached the scene, they found Emma in tears. She told them that Arthur had fallen, striking his head, and instead of getting back up, he had deliberately slammed his head against the floor 5 more times. She further claimed that she had attempted to help Arthur, but he responded by hitting and kicking her.
He's banged himself the radiator, he's hit me, he's kicked me in the process of trying to get him back on the thinking step.
Although it seemed unlikely that a child would do what Emma described, she was the only witness. After being examined by first responders, Arthur was rushed to Birmingham Children's Hospital. There, doctors confirmed he had suffered a severe brain injury, and despite their best efforts, the 6-year-old boy passed away a few hours later. Arthur's death was caused by the injury, but his body told a much darker story of the pain and suffering he had endured leading up to that moment. When doctors took a closer look, they discovered that at the time of his death, Arthur had a total of 130 bruises all over his body. He had also been poisoned with a large quantity of salt. The bruises made one thing clear: the little boy had been tortured. The only question was, who did it? In cases like this, it's standard procedure for investigators to start by looking at the people closest to the victim. And that's exactly what they did. That same evening, Arthur's father, Thomas Hughes, and his girlfriend, Emma Tustin, were arrested. First on suspicion of assault, then for murder. Arthur Labinjo-Hughes was born on January 4th, 2014 to Thomas Hughes and Olivia Labinjo-Hughes. The family of 3 stayed together for 2 years, and in that time, all appeared to be well. Sadly, not long after Arthur's 2nd birthday, Thomas and Olivia split up. The separation meant that Arthur would live with his mother, although both parents were sharing custody, and things remained that way for a few years. However, things took a drastic turn in February 2019, when Olivia was arrested for stabbing her partner, Gary Cunningham, to death. The couple had been in a toxic relationship that ended with Gary dead and Olivia in jail. With his mother behind bars, Arthur landed in the care of his father, Thomas, who was living in an annex behind his parents' home at the time. In the first few days of living with his father and grandparents, Arthur seemed nervous, which was understandable for a child whose life had changed so suddenly. But according to his grandmother, it didn't take long for him to settle in and become a happy, well-rounded little boy.
He was gentle, caring, compassionate.
Arthur's life was good for the coming months. He was healthy and happy. But that all changed in August 2019 when his father met Emma Tustin on a dating website. Thomas was honest with Emma about having a son from the beginning. He tried to make sure that she knew what she was getting into. According to Emma, she and Arthur clicked and quickly became friends, but that relationship would soon turn sour. Arthur's uncle noticed a change in his brother's behavior after he started dating Emma. He became much stricter with the little boy, and Arthur always seemed afraid of doing something wrong. By November of that year, Arthur's behavior had changed so much that even his teachers took notice. He seemed less happy and more withdrawn. Concerned, they invited his father, Thomas, and grandmother, Joanne, for a meeting. During the discussion, the teachers shared something especially troubling. Arthur had become fixated on the idea that his father might leave him or even kill him. To make things worse, Arthur had also developed an unsettling interest in death, murder, and guns. How does a happy little boy end up obsessed with guns and murder at such a young age? And more importantly, why did Arthur believe his own father wanted to kill him? While we may never be able to answer these questions, what we do know is how Thomas responded to the news. In March 2020, Thomas took his son to a mental health center multiple times. The doctor who checked Arthur shared the same concerns as his teachers, noting that the little boy was anxious his father wouldn't come home one day. In the end, the doctor concluded that, aside from his fear of losing his father or being killed by him, Arthur had no mental health issues. Most of Arthur's visits to the mental health center happened in 2020, but by then, he wasn't in school anymore. The UK had shut down all schools because of COVID-19, and by the end of March, a nationwide lockdown was in place. It affected everyone in some way. But for Arthur, it made everything worse. At the start of the lockdown, Thomas turned down his mother Joanne's offer for him and Arthur to stay with her.
And Arthur started to cry, and he said, Grandma, can I stay with you?
And instead moved in with his girlfriend Emma at her home in Solihull. Less than a month after Thomas and Arthur moved in, the signs of trouble started to show. After an argument with Emma, Thomas took Arthur to his parents' house for a short visit. While they were there, Arthur's grandmother Joanne noticed several bruises on his back. When she asked about it, the little boy told her that his father's girlfriend had pinned him against a wall and called him a horrible, ugly brat. But before Joanne could look into the matter, Thomas decided it was time to return to Emma's house. In a bid to save her grandson, Joanne asked Thomas to leave Arthur at her house for a little longer, but he refused. Left with no other choice, Joanne reported the incident to social services and sent them pictures of the bruises she had seen on Arthur's back on April 16th, 2020.
I said, you need to fill me in, what's going on? And Joanna said they'd found bruises on Arthur.
Social services responded immediately, and a social worker was sent to Emma's house the following day. When she was asked about the bruises, Emma claimed Arthur had gotten into a fight with her son, and that's how he was injured. By the end of the visit, she had convinced the social worker that everything was fine, and that Arthur was very happy and very safe. Of course, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Thomas later admitted in court that Emma had coached both Arthur and her son to lie about the fight, which made it easy to fool the social worker. She even warned Thomas that if he didn't go along with her story, they'd both lose their kids, so he went along with it. Instead of protecting his son, Thomas did nothing to stop the abuse, and, at times, he even joined in. Throughout May 2020, Emma would punish Arthur by making him stand in the hallway for hours. She'd record him crying and send the audio to Thomas. In one, Arthur could be heard sobbing for his grandmother and uncle, but Thomas didn't care. He ignored his son's cries and let the abuse continue. When the couple were not punishing the little boy unnecessarily, they would rain insults on him. They called him all sorts of names like Devil Child and Weasel. They even went as far as calling him Satan. Towards the end of May, things went from bad to worse. Emma and Thomas sent Arthur out of the room he shared with Emma's children and forced him to sleep on the living room floor. In the days that followed, Emma and Thomas made Arthur's life a living nightmare. The abuse didn't stop, not until the day he took his last breath.
He's then gone on all fours on the floor and I've told him to get up. And I shut the door over and all I heard was a crack off the floor.
Between June 12th and 14th, Arthur was forced to spend a total of 35 hours in the hallway. Thomas and Emma had installed a CCTV camera in the house to keep an eye on Arthur during this time. What they didn't realize was that the footage would later be used against them The recordings showed Emma mercilessly slapping Arthur when he tried to step out of the hallway and into the living room. It also captured her and her children eating and enjoying themselves while Arthur was left alone, forced to stand in the hallway. The abuse reached a new level on June 15, 2020. That day, Emma took Arthur with her to a hair appointment at her hairdresser's house. For the entire 6 hours they were there, she forced the 6-year-old to stand by the door. By the time they were ready to leave that evening, Arthur's legs had given out. He collapsed to the floor, too weak to stand. But neither Emma nor Thomas, who had come to pick them up, did anything to help him. The next morning, on June 16th, the couple's home camera showed that Arthur was weak when he woke up. He was in pain and had a hard time packing up his beddings, but Emma and Thomas paid him no attention. Later that day, they took him with them back to the hairdresser's house. The hairdresser would later testify in court that the couple took turns shouting at Arthur. She said he looked so malnourished that her partner went behind the couple's back to give him a glass of water to drink. Emma and Arthur left the hairdresser's house that afternoon and were back home at about 2 p.m. Less than an hour later, Emma was sending Thomas a text that his son was in bad shape. The details of what happened to Arthur between the time they got home and 2:42 p.m. when Emma placed the 999 call may remain a secret forever, but the irreparable damage had been done. A few hours later, Arthur was pronounced dead. During the investigation, authorities examined hundreds of pictures, audio clips, and videos from Emma's and Thomas's phones.
The circumstances around the death will be now subject of independent review.
After reading through and analyzing their messages, there was significant evidence that the couple had abused Arthur. On the first day of the trial, Emma pleaded guilty to one charge of willfully ill-treating Arthur on multiple occasions by forced standing, isolation, and intimidation. However, this was not the only crime Emma was guilty of. As the trial progressed, medical experts revealed that the injuries on Arthur's body could not have been self-inflicted. He was a 6-year-old, and it was impossible for him to have generated enough force to cause such a fatal brain injury. The court heard that Arthur had dangerously high levels of salt in his system, so high that he would have had to consume at least 6.5 tablespoons on the day he died. Experts agreed there was no reason a child would ingest that much salt on his own, meaning an adult had likely poisoned him with a salt and water mixture. There was also the possibility that he had been slowly poisoned over time. The evidence provided in court proved that Arthur's father and his lover had deliberately poisoned and abused him until he died. As the trial neared its end, Emma knew the evidence against her was impossible to fight. With no way out, she pleaded guilty to another charge of child cruelty, probably hoping for a lighter sentence. But after everything she had done, there was no escaping the consequences. In December 2021, Emma Tustin was convicted of murdering Arthur Labinjo-Hughes at Coventry Crown Court and was given a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years.
And as you say, today he has sentenced her to life in prison with a minimum term of 29 years.
Her partner in crime and Arthur's father, Thomas Hughes, was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 21 years in prison. Do you think Thomas got the sentence he deserved for his role in Arthur's abuse? Could the government have done more to protect him? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more cases like this, check out the next video below.